Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Zadov's Chess Channel, and welcome to the Airthings Masters tournament in 2020. Today's most attractive game from the knockout stage, I think, was the match game between Magnus Carlsen and Daniil Dubov. So, Daniil Dubov, really an interesting player. He won many games in the group stage. He also lost many games in the group stage, but still, we like to see his games because he's trying basically to play his chess. He's trying this attractive chess without even calculating so much about the result. I think, of course, Daniil Dubov wants to have a great result, but he wants to basically have fun and to play his great chess. That's why we love him. We love to watch his games. And today he played the Shark. Of course, it's Magnus Carlsen, which was, I think, really the best match game in this event so far. So let's check out now the one game, and then I'm going to reveal, of course, the results of the quarterfinals. Here, Magnus opened with the move knight to f3. We have knight to f6 by Dubov, c4. We have e6. So many sidelines can happen so far. In the game, Magnus tried knight to c3, and here Dubov played a symmetrical system with the move c5, which basically can sometimes transpose into the Tarrasch defense, or maybe even into some Queen's Gambit accepted lines, which isn't, of course, this opening that they're playing so far. But with Queen's Gambit accepted ideas, I'll explain, of course, what I'm thinking about that, because here after e3 and a6, what Daniil Dubov is waiting for maybe is after potential d5 that he can play, then he could play something like d takes c4, and after bishop to c4, then he could advance the pawn here on b5, getting a tempo against the bishop. Then the bishop has to retreat. Maybe in a long-term plan also black could proceed and push the pawn further here with the move b4. So in the game, Magnus, of course, plays the move d4. We have d5 by Dubov, which is now a similar structure to the Tarrasch defense. If you're familiar with the Tarrasch, many times black is playing the setup in order to maybe provoke some weaknesses. When we have sort of a collision like this, you have to always calculate what's the result of this potential trades of pawns. The problem for black here is that black has lost the tempo now with the move a6, and so that's why Magnus undermines the pressure. He doesn't want to risk this isolated situation, because after potential e takes d5, then d takes c5 as a long-term plan could also work, and then black is sometimes left with this isolated pawn situation. So here Dubov takes e takes d5, but there is also one problem now for white, because if Magnus takes now d takes c5, then this bishop comes out very actively. And here after castling, I think, and after knight to c6, then with the potential d4 move, black could have a comfortable game, because this isolated pawn wouldn't be so weak. It can be improved, it can be moved forward in a couple of moves. So that's why it's not good to take here. That's why Magnus goes now here with the move g3. But here, even if you try something like bishop to e2, then you risk in some occasions this locking idea by black. Black could paralyze you here on the queen side and could proceed with the move b5 b4. So it's really hard to play this position. So that's why Magnus Carlsen goes into the normal Tarrasch setups like we used to play against the Tarrasch. But there is, as I said, a new problem for Magnus. He has blocked out his dark square bishop. Still, this position has been played many times, but I simply don't like to have this setup. Sometimes I like to have this bishop to g2, and then without the move e3, then we could maybe proceed with bishop to g5. At least we could attack the knight on f6, and then maybe play in long term something like d takes c5, because many times we have seen that black could have troubles around the square d5. So that's why you see, okay, it is playable. Of course, Magnus Carlsen is the world champion, but as I said, here I think Dubov played already a very interesting line, which basically paralyzed a little bit the dark square bishop of white. So here knight to c6. Bishop to g2. Now comes the same idea. D takes, pardon me, c4. As I said, if d takes c5 happens, then this bishop comes very active into the game. So here, Dubov undermines the pressure in the center and creates now a blocked pawn structure in the center. So let's stop and evaluate the position. What are the goals of this position? The goals of every blocked or static pawn structure are outposts. So from white perspective, white wants to occupy, of course, the e5 square. From black's perspective, black wants to occupy, of course, the e4 square. So in the game castling, we have bishop to b4 played by Dubov, because we said we want to occupy the e4. So that's why here we want to undermine the pressure. We want to take out the knight, which is the key defender of the weak e4 square. So in the game, Magnus immediately plays on outpost ideas. If you take knight takes e5, then d takes e5, you see the knight gets deflected from the defense of the d5 square, so that's why you shouldn't take. In the game, Dubov castled simply, and now bishop to d2, and that's what I meant. This e3 setup, I think you would love to have now this bishop somewhere here, maybe on g5 or even on f4 on a more active square. You see this bishop is simply blocked out by this pawn change, so that's why this bishop by Magnus Carlsen is really a bad bishop. Rook to e8 played by Dubov, knight takes c6, we have b takes c6, and now b3. This is also a normal idea, which has been played many times. I myself, I'm a d4 player, and I've reached a similar position many times, and when I see this advanced pawn on c4, I like to crack the position with the move b3, although after potential d takes c4, pardon me, c takes b3 and a takes b3, you are maybe leaving an isolated pawn situation here, but in long terms you could maybe occupy here then the weak c5 square, or maybe if the position allows it, also the weak e5 square. Black is also left in this particular case with a backward pawn, so that's why both players could have some kind of weakness which his opponent can attack, but I think after this continuation white is slightly better, so that's why after the move b3, Dubov plays here simply bishop takes c3. He wants to occupy, as I said, this weak square. Bishop takes c3, and now after bishop takes c3, knight to e4. If you take bishop to e4, then you are having I think many troubles here. After rook to e4, you see the light square problems that you have in front of the king, because you gave up your light square bishop, are I think simply too much to handle here for black. Black could have really good continuation here, so that's why Magnus played rook to c1. He wants to protect his bishop, and he would love, of course, that Dubov takes out now the bad bishop on c3, because after rook to c3, then I think white is slightly better, because there is this tension. After maybe again c takes b3, a takes b3 can happen, and again we could attack this backward pawn, so that's why taking out the bishop here on c3 is not an option for Dubov, because you don't want to give, of course, you don't want to give up, of course, your good piece for a bad piece of white. It's of course the bad bishop on c3. So a5, Dubov tries this minority attack here on the queen side, maybe with even some ideas to play the move a4, but the main goal is here to develop the bishop on a very active square on a6, and then threaten something like c takes b3. In the game, Magnus tried finally to undermine the pressure in the center. B takes c4, we have bishop to a6, the pinning idea, f3, and now Daniil Dubov takes knight takes c3, because Magnus Carlsen has weakened with the move f3 the pawn structure here. We have now also clear target here from black's perspective. It's the weak backward pawn here on e3, so that's why when you move pawns, okay, you can maybe kick away one piece, but you also create weaknesses, new weaknesses that your opponent can attack here after knight takes c3, rook to c3, and now bishop to c4. We have now really an equal game. Maybe black even slightly better here because of this bishop's activity. This bishop is a little bit blocked out again by its own pawn. If you want to improve it here with f4 in order to create some kind of activity, it's also not so good. Then you leave also weak square in your position here. It's the weak square on e4. So really this tiny little things, basically it's all about weaknesses here. Weakness, and basically a weakness in a chess game can be a weak square or a weak pawn. So that's why I think so far really a good game by Daniil Dubov. So rook to f2, we have queen to g5, queen to c1, h5. Very nice attack. We want, of course, even to play the move h4. If g takes h4 happens, then we could have really some tensions here on the g file. So the bishop to f1 played by Magnus. He wants really to give up finally his bad piece for a really active piece here, the bishop on c4. Here after bishop to f1, we have king to f1, rook to b8. Very important move to occupy the only open file on the board, and Magnus takes out now the backward pawn, but it comes with a risk, because here Daniil Dubov has now the opportunity to create further weaknesses. In the game, Magnus had to play king to g2 in order, of course, to protect his g3 pawn. In the game, Dubov finally takes rook to e3. We have seen both players had this backward pawn weaknesses, so Dubov gets his pawn back, and in the game we have rook to rook to c8, rook to c8, queen to c8, and now king to h7. Queen to d7, we have f6, queen to b5, Magnus Carlsen attacks the pawn, and after queen to f5, here g4 happens. And okay, you're kicking away again the queen, but the queen can again come on a very, very active square. It's of course the square f4, but here Daniil Dubov found really a great counter attack. He played the move h3. Here after king to g3, if you of course take, then I think here rook to f3, queen to f3 is immediately winning the game, so that's why it's not a possibility. King to g3, and now the king is really on a weird square in the game. Queen to e4, played by Daniil Dubov. Nice move. He gets the queen on a really weird square. You cannot take, of course, the queen because of the pin, but at least this queen is attacking the weak d4 pawn, and what we want to do is create maybe a pass pawn, which could really cause some troubles here for Magnus Carlsen. And now comes really the critical moment of the game. Magnus Carlsen takes the pawn on a5, which is now the main blunder. You cannot do that. The problem is now the queen is now too far away from the action. You don't have the queen as the defensive piece. You cannot get the queen somewhere. A better idea is simply queen to f1, trying to retreat after something like queen takes d4. We can take out this pawn, and I think you have regrouped. Still, of course, black has this pass pawn, but I think with this queen activity, and maybe if we get this rook somehow, at least we can provoke some kind of a perpetual check or something, or we can maybe create some kind of a dangerous attack against black's king, because black's king is also a little bit naked, doesn't have defender, so that's why I think in one particular moment Dubov would have to retreat with the queen, or maybe with the rook towards the 7th or 8th rank in order to protect the king. But this position, I think it is playable, but Magnus Carlsen placed a huge blunder, queen to f5, and now Daniil Dubov finds really a great attacking move, f5, splitting really the pawn structure in front of the king. It's not about pawns anymore, it's simply a game of king security. After g takes f5, queen to f5, we have queen to b5, the queen comes too late into the game. Even if you try queen to d6, maybe queen to d8 to get the queen somehow into the attack, then rook to e6 is very dangerous with ideas to play rook to g6. So again, a completely losing game here for white. So in the game after the move queen to b5, Daniil Dubov tried rook to e6 anyway. We have rook to e2, but now rook to g6. We have king to f2, queen to f4, attacking the pawn on h2. We have queen to b1, now king to h6. We don't want to, of course, get the king here on the same diagonal like the queen. So now the queen is not active anymore. We can play now much freer with our rook. In the game we have queen to d3. Here Dubov simply takes queen to h2, king to e3, and here after to move rook to e6 in this position, Magnus Carlsen resigned. Because of this, if you retreat, then we can simply take, check. So here, after trades of pieces, we have here a distant pass pawn, which Magnus Carlsen cannot catch, and in this position, as I said, Magnus Carlsen resigns. So, okay, after the first day of the quarterfinal stage, we have really an interesting result. Magnus Carlsen won one game, also Daniil Dubov won one game, and they played 2 draws. Tomorrow, they're battling their second match game. We'll see who'll make it to the semifinals. I think this is really interesting, because Daniil Dubov has really great chances, maybe even to win this one against Magnus Carlsen. So, okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. If you want to see more games from this tournament, check out my Airthings Masters tournament so far. Here's the link, and if you want to see maybe the best chess games of all times, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link, and if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.